Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start the meeting now. It's appointed hour. We would start with my call to order, and then we start with the Pledge of Allegiance, if you'll rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Yasmin, are we in compliance with the Freedom of Information Act?
Yes, sir, we
on
are.
this meeting? Thank you. Would you please call the roll?
Of course. Mr. D'Arienzo? Mrs.
Here.
Mrs. Siebold?
Here.
Mr. Hens?
Here.
Mr. Campbell?
Here.
Mrs. Scanlon?
Here.
Mr. O'Neill is excused.
Okay. Do we have any staff changes to the agenda for today's meeting? I'm going to make one suggestion that I want to move up one item that's late on the agenda. I want to move it up for a couple of reasons. One, we have a lot of citizens who want to talk to us about it. That would be the staff report that's going to be on the Hilton Head project over at off of Folly Field Road and Wimbledon Court. I'm going to move that up a little bit in the agenda. It will come right after the first LMO amendments, and it will be before the second LMO amendments. So I'm going to move that change to agendas. All in favor of that change, please identify by raising your right hand. Okay, that's unanimous. We will change the agenda in that order. Let's see. We have the minutes of the last meeting of November the 16th. Do I have a motion to accept those?
So moved.
So moved. Do I have a second? Second from Mr. Campbell. All in favor of approving the minutes of the previous meeting? It's unanimous, 5-0 vote on that. Next is the appearance of citizens. Yasmin, do we have any appearances by citizens for today?
No, sir, we don't.
We do not. Okay. And for the record, did we receive porthole comments? And I know we did because I've been reading them for the last hour.
Yes, sir, we did.
Yes, we get lots of porthole comments from the community. There is no unfinished business, so let's move into a new business, if we will. And I'm going to call on Missy to start us off with the LMO amendments, Section A here today.
Thank you. Missy Lewitt, Community Planning Manager for the record. I'm here to talk about the Islander mixed-use amendment proposal. This request is from Josh Tiller of J.K. Tiller Associates for a text amendment to allow a new use to be established called Islander Mixed Use. It's proposed to be established within the Sea Pine Circle District. The proposal adds a definition. It establishes use-specific conditions and some exceptions to the development form standards. So before you is an amendment to the following sections in the Land Management Ordinance: 16.3-105M, Sea Pine Circle District; 16.4-102A, Principal Uses; 16.4-102B, Use-Specific Conditions; and 16.10-103A, Use Classifications, Use Types, and Definitions. So it's staff's recommendation before you that the Planning Commission review this amendment and forward a recommendation on to Town Council. So I'm going to go through first what the request is and then go through the staff analysis of that request. So based on what was before you and provided by the applicant, it starts with the creation of a new use, and that use again is called Islander Mixed Use. And the definition that's proposed is that it includes two or more uses that include Islanders mixed use and either an office use or commercial service use, as well as it allows dormitory group living use within the definition that's proposed. Again, this request is that it's allowed within the Sea Pine Circle District, and that it would require for the residential use 1.5 parking spaces per dwelling unit, and then for the non-residential use, 1 per 500 of gross floor area. So this use is proposed to be permitted with conditions, and the specific conditions are outlined here on this slide. So they're proposing the use to be allowed, that the use would allow a shared parking agreement. Right now, mixed-use development does not allow shared parking agreements, so they're proposing a use-specific condition that would allow shared parking plans to be utilized with this use. They're proposing that it would be applicable to properties within 500 feet of an education use. And also, they're proposing that this use would not be a short-term rental property as defined in our short-term rental ordinance, which is a property that's rented for 30 days or less. So this use also has some development form standard exceptions that they're proposing. One is that it has undefined density, so an exception to the density limits within the Sea Pine Circle district, but that those would be defined by the design and performance standards within the district. And also, it's proposed to have a height exception, to have a maximum height of 55 feet, and the Sea Pine Circle district allows 45 feet. So now I'm going to go through the staff analysis of the request. So certainly the use, Islanders mixed use, to have mixed use, mix of residential, is worthy of review and consideration. Currently, mixed use is a use that's allowed within the Sea Pine Circle district. It has a density limitation of 12 dwelling units per net acre and 10,000 gross floor area for non-residential. And again, mixed use currently does not allow the inclusion of a shared parking plan for residential. So of course, that's how this use differs from the mixed use that is allowed in the Sea Pine Circle district. So Islanders mixed use includes, again, in the use type, 2 or more uses, which will include Islander mixed use and then office use or commercial services use, and also allows group living dormitory use. So for group living is currently not allowed in the Sea Pine Circle district. Group living dormitory use is part of the use definition that's proposed. As proposed, there is not a use mix ratio. So as proposed, say all of the residential that was proposed as part of Islanders mixed use could be group living dormitory use. So one of the things that staff is requesting the Planning Commission to consider is that perhaps there's a maximum portion of group living dormitory use that would be applied to this particular new use. And if you were looking to do so, it could be something that could be added to the use-specific conditions. So the density for the proposed use is undefined. So again, that density would be defined more by the development form standards, like height, parking, lot coverage, setbacks, and buffers would be how the form of the development would have some parameters applied to it. The only other district in our code that has undefined density is the Caligny Resort District, and that area is defined by those same development form standards. So again, as the density is undefined, and staff has talked about it in prior meetings with the LMO committee, we were looking that undefined density be tied to a workforce housing component in some way. Something to consider would be to consider adding a use-specific condition that required a percentage of the residential to be workforce housing within some AMI range, somewhere between 60 and 120% as an example, and then tied to some sort of workforce housing agreement. And we have agreement language within the code already. It could follow some template or form per our workforce housing standards that we already have established. So that would be one thing to consider as you review this proposal. Again, the parking, the proposal again is for 1.5 spaces for the residential and 1 per 500 for the non-residential, and as well as the establishment of the allowance that it be, can accommodate a shared parking plan. So we do allow shared parking plans for a variety of other uses, however, not mixed use. And it has, in the shared parking section, quite a few requirements for a shared parking agreement. It can only be for up to 50% of the parking spaces, only if those uses generate parking demands during different times of the day or days of the week. There's requirements for pedestrian access, and that the applicant requires and they provide the justification of that, the need and how they meet the parking demands at the differing times of the day. And then that agreement is reviewed by all of the parties that would be subject to that parking agreement or shared parking arrangement, and then it gets recorded with the Register of Deeds. So, so if it would meet some of those requirements, a shared parking plan seems to be reasonable. So the proposal also has, it's proposed to be within 500 feet of an education use. We found through looking at what biking and walking tolerances are that it's reasonable to expect someone to be able to walk or bike between 500 and 1,500 feet. And we included a map within the packet. The hot pink is the Sea Pine Circle district, and then there's a 500-foot radius, a 1,000-foot radius, and a 1,500-foot radius. Based on the walking and biking tolerances, we would recommend that the use be expanded to up to 1,000 feet to meet those walking and biking tolerances. It keeps most of the eligible area to be south of the Sea Pine Circle district. And then it eliminates the appearance that it could be considered spot zoning because it would accommodate some additional parcels that would be eligible to utilize this use. So this slide shows that there are 23 parcels within 500 feet, there are 34 parcels within 1,000 feet, and 49 parcels within 1,500 feet. So the height, as proposed, they're looking for a maximum height of 55 feet. And of course, the height limit for all development within Sea Pine Circle District is currently 45 feet. We would ask the Planning Commission to consider keeping the 45 feet such that development within all of the Sea Pine Circle District is within that height limitation. So that wraps up my analysis of it. I understand that the applicant team also would like to present, so I can take questions from the Planning Commission now or after.
With your permission, Missy, I think we'd like to hear from the applicant, and then
Okay.
we'll do questions all around.
Sounds great.
Hello. My name's Lewis Hammond. I represent the applicant. Josh Tiller, who worked closely with putting a lot of this together, is out with the COVID. But we have other people here that have been integral to this. Myself, the principal, David Despain, and others. Alan Wolf is here from Surge Group. I just want to say a couple of overview things that weren't touched on in the staff or that weren't touched on from the angle that we do. This is something that this developer put together in close consultation with the USCB. They need housing, and this developer agreed to provide it. The reason it wants to be shared housing is we already have an agreement with USCB for 75 shared spaces that we can use. That's different than probably anything else that will come before you. And frankly, it makes the density standards sort of irrelevant for our site because we have so much parking right next door and so much functioning with there. But we work very closely with them, and Alan Wolf has worked very closely with us through the whole process, from concept until we've arrived here. Again, he's the head of the largest employer on the island, and as you all know better than I, that's a big concern, particularly at the south end of the island. And what we're trying to do is put together some housing that can be used by service industry workers and broad service industry. I mean, that's more than just bartenders and waitresses. It might be assistant managers or tellers at banks. Anything in the industry, people that need to live down here can't and that are having to commute because they can't. There's been some talk that you've heard to ask us to consider doing some workforce housing, rent subsidized, rent restricted. We're not proposing that for a couple of reasons. For one thing, it really doesn't work with a development plan. The keeping track of it and having to, we're going to double check every month to see who's still working and who's not, and how much they're making. Do we go by how much a service worker has on his W-2, or how much debate how much his tips are with them? A lot of things like that I don't know if the town would police or want us to police. But more than that, they're looking for, or been talking about maybe let's look at 10 to 20%. Well, the only way we achieve 10 to 20%, even if this developer could put that together, is to raise the price of the other 80 to 90% of units, which we don't want to do. We've agreed to limit short-term rentals. There won't be any short-term rentals. And the town has already identified that as probably the biggest problem on the south end of the island. We're eliminating that. Plus, where we're going to build it, as you all know, down Office Way there, is tucked in right next to the school with major service industry, restaurant groups, bar groups, things like that surrounding it. And so we see that as being a major part of our market. We're not restricting only to that, because once you build it, you can't get finance to build it if you're going to leave units vacant. But that's our target market, and we're working with major employers to bring people in to that target market. Just as an aside, as I think y'all know, right now this is a largely abandoned and somewhat dilapidated office site with a lot of office space on it. This would replace that. But under y'all's ordinances, that can be redeveloped by right. And we've had traffic people look at it, not do a full traffic study, but just look at the ITE manual on what trip generation our proposal would be compared to doing all that office commercial. And we're told that at peak hours it would be much more traffic with the office commercial, which is a by right use, than what we're doing. So we think what we're doing is actually a reduction in the impact of this development. Again, we've worked very closely with both USCB and these members of the employment community and tried to come up with the thing we think works best. We recommended that it be 500 feet from our site to an educational site because we were 500 feet. I don't think we have any objection if the town would like to allow that district to be at 1,000 foot or 1,500 foot. It would include other properties. We drafted it to include ours. So that's really not a problem, I don't think. On the height limitation, we want to go to 55 from 45. That does not add another story to what we're planning to do. But our design people, both architects and Mr. Tiller and others, say at 55 feet, we can design a better product. We don't have to be just 8-foot ceilings. We could have a little higher ceiling in some places. We can do architectural features for aesthetic purposes that y'all's ordinance used to allow, going through a process that I don't think it does now. So that's the sort of thing we want to do, is build a better project. That does not translate into more density or more intensity. It's just for a better product. Again, this was mentioned too, that we want to be ruled by performance standards rather than a fixed density when it comes to the site. That's what we got in Coligny, right next door, another intense district that we'd be compatible with as far as using the performance standards. We think it's particularly appropriate for this site because so much of our parking is off-site through this shared arrangement with USCB, for whom we're providing some housing. So I think that makes it particularly appropriate that we do it that way. gee whiz, to calculate the density on our site, if you had that 75 additional spaces, room for that, plus the landscaped median stuff that goes with the parking spaces, the open space that goes with it, setbacks that go with it, stormwater drainage, there would be considerably more. We like going by the standards because y'all have pretty strict standards on Hilton Head Island. We've been working on that since the day we were incorporated with setbacks, stormwater. Those were two of the things we put first in the new ordinance was stormwater. Those things are serious restrictions on what you can do. So this is not unlimited density. It just gives us the ability to plan within the standards you've already adopted. I'm going to have Alan Wolf from Surge Group say something, because serving that service worker market in a non-short-term product is such a big part of what we want to do. I want him to say a thing or two. I'm not sure if I missed any point that y'all would want me to address. If so, I'll be here.
Yes, we may take questions for you. We may have some for you later on, if that's all right. You want to introduce your colleague?
Alan?
Commissioners. Alan Wolf, Surge Restaurant Group. I think Lou laid it out pretty clearly. We're excited to be here. This was over a year ago that the developer approached us at the Surge Restaurant Group to see if we'd like to see some dormitory housing on the south end, and we said, please wait and put the right product, and that product would serve more than just group living. And this is a tremendous outcome. I think a year later of working with the town staff and developers, Surge Group has finally put our money where our mouth is. We were invested in the product, and we believe that we can help solve this problem of workforce housing. And this is just a very small first step, and we're hoping that we can answer any questions you might have.
Fair enough. Are there any other applicant spokespersons?
No, I would recognize we have some members of the team from the USCB side that are here and anxious to hear if you all have any questions related to that. Okay. I would just touch on the one point that Lou made about the height. They're looking to do a peaked roof at 55 feet, not a flat roof, for architectural design standard purposes. So to his point, there would be no additional housing on another level. It was just for architectural purposes.
Fair enough. Okay. We'll start with Mr. Hens. Questions or comments?
That's a lot of information. First of all, how'd you come up with island and mixed use? What's the significant?
Well, I think it started off as service worker mixed use, and I think it needed to be a wider net. This isn't for just bartenders, waitresses, bums like me, but it's for firefighters and teachers and educators and everyone that exactly. It's for the Islander group, yeah.
Well, I think this is outstanding. I think that the biggest challenge that we have as a town, one of the biggest challenges is certainly workforce housing. And I applaud you, Alan, because you've been a leader in the charge for developing workforce housing in the island for years. And it seems like you finally got something.
We're knocking. We're knocking. We're knocking on the door.
And so, very important for the town to work with community members and developers for this challenge, which is workforce housing. It's great that USCB is involved, and I know that it's important for them to have student housing there for their hospitality campus, because hospitality is one of our main industries here. You're the main employer in that area, and so the school's helping to populate what's management for what is our industry here, and so it just seems like it's a win-win for everybody. I like the fact that it's critical that it's not allowing short-term rentals. It's for the workforce. A question would be, how do you limit escalating rents so that it stays workforce housing?
Well, we certainly will rapidly seek out contracts with hoteliers, service providers like the Greenery, firefighters, restaurant providers like us to secure long-term contracts that would avoid any increases year over year. That's going to be the primary goal.
Some other key things are it is upgrading what is old old and underutilized property, so that's eliminates, it makes modern what's old, and that's a good thing for the island. Shared parking is key and a wonderful advantage, because who needs more parking lots? So if you can share, that's just another win-win. So I really am excited to hear about this project.
Great, thank you.
Mr. D'Arienzo.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, just for your information, the LMO committee did review this last month and recommended to move that forward to this larger body for discussion, as we're doing today. All of our concerns have been addressed. Personally, I think it's a very clever and creative approach to dealing with the need for workforce housing and also taking care of students nearby. It's a perfect location for this kind of thing, and the way it's been handled is, I believe, very well done. As far as the students are concerned, would the students be considered, they'll have an opportunity after the workforce is first considered?
Well, actually, we have 16 quad units that are set up specifically for students. So that would be some 64 students that would have primary access to those year-round. It's a separate building from the general apartments. And the hope would be to keep them here working in the summer as well, and also make those annual leases if possible. But yeah, they'd have their own space.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Campbell.
Alan, definitely like to thank you and Serge for presenting this. I mean, I definitely see this project be working out. My one question is this: how many units are there going to be?
We're shooting for 132, 16 of which would be, the specific dormitory units.
Okay. And to tell you the truth, with the shared parking, in my head, I'm thinking that the kids and actually adults would be riding bicycles. So I have no problem with that at all. But
And of that 132, there's a fairly strong blend of studio units. So we're talking 600 square feet roughly.
Okay.
Which is the desire for more units, even though it's going to be the same floor space ultimately.
all right. And how many heads to beds are you thinking?
I think that ends up being about 266.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
As opposed to by right, if we put 8 beds, 450 possibly, yeah.
All right. I just wanted to get those numbers, but thank you for definitely
you.
presenting this.
Mr. Seabolt.
Alan, I'd also like to commend you for moving forward on this project. I think it meets all the
Thank you.
things that Tom Hens said about repurposing some space and that needs to be done in the shared parking. I have a couple of questions for Missy, though, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
Are there any substantive changes since the LMO committee reviewed this material on November 1st?
The changes were those that the applicant team agreed to at the meeting, and so that is what was presented.
Okay. And in terms of the 55-foot height waiver, can you tell me the height of the buildings at the Water Walk at Shelter Cove or the new Gardner project down on Gardner Road, those apartment buildings? Do you remember the height of those buildings?
Gosh, not off the top of my head, no.
I'm trying to picture this from something that I already know about, but.
Okay.
Okay.
We can get you that information.
Thank you.
Well, I want to also thank the applicants for this creative proposal. It is a different kind of animal because you're providing dormitory space for the university, service employee housing for the island at the south end, which is hard to find, and the shared parking is a great idea. I'm glad you were able to work something out with the university. The idea of committing to no short-term rentals is another very positive thing about this proposal. With regard to the density, I think when you take the density issue, if you look at the combination of all that you've got in this project, including the dormitory rooms and then the apartments, yeah, I don't know that the density becomes an issue, at least not in my opinion, on this particular situation. With regard to the height exemption or variance, whatever it might be called, I don't have a major issue with that as long as it's architectural and doesn't add another story to the proposal buildings, the proposed size of the buildings. The dormitory, if I have this correct, if I don't, the dormitories will serve, what, 48 students or 64 students? Okay. All right, well, that's awesome. So I have no major problems personally with what you've got proposed here, but I do commend you for trying to kill more than one bird with the stone.
I think the town staff recommendation for 1,000 feet diameter makes sense, and I would highly encourage that for any adjacent property owners to, continue to consider that.
I would agree. Thank you. Missy, may I ask you, if the planning commission were to forward this to town council with the things I just mentioned, the shared parking, short-term, the consideration in density, the fact that they're doing the dormitory as well as the apartments, and the height limits of 55, is there anything that staff would oppose in that? Is there anything that staff would have a problem with?
Well, right now, I mean, while the title's Islanders Mixed Use, again, there's nothing that ties it to serving Islanders or workforce. We had suggested, that it meets some sort of workforce housing percentage. That could be a rent cap, that could be fair market rent. There could be other mechanisms that it serves the workforce. So staff would still recommend that there's some tie to it's actually serving the workforce that it's
Okay.
intended to serve.
All right, well, then I have a question for the applicants. If this proposal were to go forward and be approved by town council, you have mentioned that you've worked with the various organizations on the island that are looking for shelter for their employees,
That's
right?
correct.
A surge group, obviously being one mentioned already. Are there other groups? In other words, when we say workforce housing, we're looking for apartments and units that can be afforded by people who are going to be working in our community and service community. If you're making this, workforce housing has a special definition, and I'm not sure that this exactly fits into workforce housing. However, as I say, you're a different animal. And if you've got arrangements with organizations like the Surge Group or Marriott or any of these other organizations to take these units on a long-term situation, obviously they consider the proposed rents that you would be charging to be reasonable enough for their service employees. And in a sense, it may not be the strict definition of workforce housing on the rents, but if these organizations are willing to sign up with you, that would seem to me to be, even though it's maybe not within the exact definition, it is definitely going to be a service,
It will, and I will point out the
environment.
rents that we have plugged in pro forma are anywhere from 90 to 140% AMI already to make the deal pencil, and that's strictly because the land cost on the south end is so expensive. If that was cut down, maybe there'd be more flexibility, but we're already in range, and if I was to pull up apartments.com or Zillow and show you the rates of one bedrooms in Bluffton for $1,700 or $1,800, you'd be paying more there than you would for a studio in this unit. So we're already fairly competitive, with what's going on in the market. And certainly if we were to be able to be considered for rezoning, then we're happy to have that conversation with the town to see if there's any room to work together further on that.
Well, in the eyes of the renters, it's a reasonable rent for their employees.
Correct.
Then it would seem to me that, it's within the broad definition of what we're trying to do for our service employees on the island. Any other, Mr. Seabold?
Yeah, Alan, do I recall from a previous presentation that you made that this is largely market rate housing, but with the hope that employers like yourself would help to subsidize certain people in those to make it, to do a little bit of subsidy from within to make it
It seems to me
affordable?
that the burden should fall on us as employers to some degree to say, how bad do you want an employee? Yeah, if you have to close the gap, but that would be at any property, I would argue.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
to
thought
close
I
the gap.
remembered from a previous
Yeah,
presentation.
absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions on the panel?
Yeah, I have two questions here.
Go ahead, John.
Is this for seasonal employees or just?
No, 3 months is the minimum, is that right, Missy? 3 months minimum lease term?
There's no lease term restriction.
That was to avoid the short-term rental. We had looked at
30
90 days,
day
as the
thing,
minimum.
yeah.
So
Okay.
potentially you could fill a summer, employee, that sort of thing, but there's nothing shorter than that.
That, and what is the lot size?
4.36 4.6 acres
Okay, okay,
combined,
yeah, okay.
all current and existing that would be redeveloped.
All right,
All right.
thank you. Any other questions from the panel? Missy, any other comments?
Yeah. While the applicant team does have a specific development in mind, I wanted to remind the Planning Commission this is a text amendment that impacts several properties, and not all of them may have these same agreements in place, and that, again, they have the desire to work with area employers to make this affordable and serve their workforce. That may not be the case with other properties that would take advantage of this new use within that radius where this would be allowed. So, the four main areas that staff had identified are still some of the concerns that we have. It sounds like expanding the radius to 1,000 feet is something the applicant team also agrees with. The use mix for, certainly right now with the education use with USCB, it doesn't have a student population that attends that university building for all of their classes. As drafted, again, that use mix could be that it's all dormitory, while if it was a regularly attended university, that would make a lot of sense to have a 100% dormitory building. That's not what the current education use facility serves. And again, on the building height, you'd asked, I already found out what the height of 55 Gardner, that's 45 feet in height. So for reference, if you're familiar with the development form there, that's again the height limit in the Sea Pine Circle District. Staff does not recommend an increase in height to that district. We'd like that to remain uniform. And again, we would like it to serve as intended, and what this applicant team is proposing for their particular development. We would like that to somehow be within the code so that it's required for anyone who wants to use island or mixed use. And so some
1,000 feet start from, is it 1,000 feet from the circle or?
from the edge of the property boundary.
Okay, okay, all right.
All right, well, thank you, Missy, appreciate it. May I have a motion on this particular project?
Public hearing. Public hearing.
Pardon?
Public hearing.
Oh, yes, obviously, comments from the, anybody want to speak on this issue in the audience? In the back row, ma'am. Please identify yourself.
My name is Kelly LeBlanc, and I feel as though I agree with the staff's recommendations that, actually all of what she said. I think that just relying on the housing, that no regulation that it be workforce housing, it's just like intended to be workforce housing, I think it's inviting a disaster. So anyone that is looking for housing, and everyone's looking for housing on Hilton Head, who isn't, especially something that's inexpensive. I could see snowbirds coming down and, well, here's something that we can afford, and let's do that, and workforce housing is not going to be able to, they're just going to drive up the rent to the point where the Surge Group or any other employer wouldn't be able to make a long-term contract because it's too expensive for them to do that. So I think that, the recommendations should include some provisions that it's required to have workforce housing. It should be a majority. Even if it's a percentage, it should be the majority of it. So dormitory and workforce housing, that's the intention. You should put it in the law or in the required.
Thank you.
That's a great point to make, because I was thinking about this before. How do you make sure that there's workers living in all the space? At a recent town housing charrette where we had, probably 40, 50 local community members, town manager Mark Orlando, he outlined how they approached that matter when he was in Bluffton, and they had a point scoring system that they applied. So you were eligible to get an open unit based on the highest point score. And of course, one of the metrics would be, are you employed and working on Hilton Head Island? You would then qualify for points. So we would lean heavily on that model to ensure that we fill 132 units with workers first. And I would be hard pressed to imagine we couldn't do so without getting to the general public. But because of fair housing standards, we'd have to employ a model like that to ensure that we've got workers going in, because we don't want to build something that, just as she alluded to, could spiral out of control. And I would also recommend that if there was an AMI, 10% of up to 120 would seem to make sense, at least with the dirt on the south end. And since we're talking 500 feet of a university, it's the only one on the island, it's all very expensive. I think that would probably work well for any future developers as well.
Thank you. Other comments from the people gathered here today? If not, then I will close the comment period on this and ask my commissioners, is there a motion that somebody wants to propose on this?
So moved.
Move that we should move this on to the town council. All right. Any other comments?
A second.
A second from Mr. Seabold here. Okay, signify by raising your hand. All in favor of the motion to move this on to town council. Thank you. It's 5-0 on the vote. All right, we're going to move into my agenda change here, and we're going to be talking about the Port Royal Resort project, and that will be here next. And I'm going to ask Sean to come before us and Nicole to discuss this particular proposal.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners. Sean Colin, Assistant Town Manager. I also serve as a Community Development Director and LMO official. So I want to make just a few comments because this process is a little different than what's included in our LMO and our normal standard operating procedure. But sometime July, August, we began to implement bringing major subdivisions and development plan reviews to Planning Commission. And there's been some question about what the role is for Planning Commission. I want to make sure we're clarifying what that is. We're bringing these plans and projects to you, one for information, but also to gain your input. For this particular project, it came into the town on January 18th, earlier this year, so we are in our 11th month. The project, and Nicole will go through a lot of the details, but this property was rezoned RD 6-8 years ago. It allows 16 dwelling units per acre. It's 8.4 acres. It allows 134 units. There is a provision where lockout units are allowed, and they count as half a dwelling unit. So there's really 166 spaces within this development, but as our code reads, it's 134
Sean,
totals. Yes, sir.
could you educate us and everyone in the room as to what lockout means?
Yeah, it's a accessory. It's an accessory space to a primary use, and so a lot of times lockouts they don't meet the full definition of a dwelling unit. They don't have another kitchen or another facility, but it can be accessed independently from the primary space. And so the town code is read this way, where it's counted lockouts as a partial unit over time, and the way the code's written right now, each one of those lockout units counts as a half of a unit. And so if they have 64 lockout units, it counts as 32 dwelling units per our code. And that provision's been part of the LMO for some time in the resort areas, because the model of development was for timeshares and these other developments was primary unit and then a lockout.
Thank you.
We've given this a lot of time and attention, and I'm sure the developer and their team can appreciate that as well. We are on our 5th round of review, comments, and revisions to the development plan. What we're really trying to accomplish here is we've got a large-scale development, large mass and scale within an area adjacent to a established neighborhood. And so we're trying to accomplish integration of this project into that neighborhood. We have been asking for improvements to circulation, to access, for safety, for street edge, to look at roadway impacts and connectivity. And so we continue to push for those things. As Nicole goes through and gives you details on the project, and you'll see some plans, and I'd requested that we get an elevation so you can see what the development looks like from the street as proposed. I'd like to get your input, but coming out of this meeting, I expect that we will request additional enhancements along the street edge. It's very important for that street to maintain its character and not lose lose that character because of the massing and scale of this project. You'll see the elevation, and I believe having a additional screening and fence commensurate or better than the fences that exist in other areas along that streetscape would make the project better. I think additional planning plan with screening of the building massing would benefit, and I'd like the commission's support and hearing your input on those things. I think enhanced circulation and safety, you know, the idea of having a fence, if you look at the elevation and the planning plan, you can move, if folks are in that development, folks can just move through kind of that, especially the initially planted buffer, and there's really no funneling into dedicated access points that would help safety and crossing of that street. And I think when you look at the plan, we've been asking for enhanced common space, common area and open space as part of the plan, and consolidation of some amenities and not pushing them out along the street edge. And so those are my expectations as the LMO official, and I ask staff to continue to push for these things. These are all consistent with the purpose and intent of our code. And while we have while there are minimum standards in the code, we are just asking for sensitive treatment in an area where the mass and scaling without these provisions may not be consistent with the neighborhood character. So I wanted to lead with that, Mr. Chairman, and let you know that we're here to hear from you. We'll give you information, but also hear from you, your input. But coming out of this meeting, those are my expectations for additional requests that I would have, especially after seeing the elevation of having a more sensitive treatment, more attention placed to that street edge along Fowlerfield Road. So thank you for the time.
Thank you, Sean. Nicole, please.
Thank you. Sean kind of stole my thunder and pretty much mentioned everything I was going to mention, but I'll just go through quickly the scope of the project. So up on the screen is an aerial view of the property. It kind of jig-jags around here, located on Fowlerfield Road. We've got the Lions to the north of the property, Ocean Palms, which is another timeshare development in the rear. We've got Fiddler's Cove multifamily down here, and then Island Club across the street. The property is currently developed as a tennis racket facility. It's been not used for years, so the plan to redevelop this property, like Sean mentioned, began probably 6 years ago. The applicant, or not this current applicant, but there was an application in several years ago for a timeshare development. It did not get approved and was withdrawn, and so a new application was submitted in January earlier this year. And staff is currently in the process of reviewing the latest plans, which were on fifth submittal, as Sean mentioned. I'll bring up the plan real quick. Not sure what this white box is. Any idea what that is?
It's just a big file.
This one? Oh, wait. Which PDF is this?
This one.
Crashing on like, I recall that same site plan.
It was, okay, here we go. Thank you.
Legend on the website.
Apologize for the delay here. So this is, so most of the plan set is in two different pages, 2 sheets for each section. But this is an overall schematic showing the proposed development, It's a little bit hard to see on your screen. It was included in your packet. But there's two entrances proposed on Folly Field Road. One, the southernmost entrance would be probably the main entrance into the development. You'll come in here. There's a roundabout here. This is the amenity center. So that would be like the main focal point of the development, amenity center, the pool. And then their development consists of 7 buildings. There's 3 4-story buildings proposed and 4 3-story buildings proposed. And you can see those buildings spaced out throughout both sides of the internal drive aisle that goes through the site and then with an exit back out onto Folly Field Road. Like Sean said, we've been pushing for good design. This is a large development proposed in the middle of an existing neighborhood, and so we're pushing to have that streetscape fit in and be consistent with what has been developed over the years out on Folly Field Road. We've been pushing for a more centralized stormwater facility to serve as an amenity for better pedestrian circulation and safety for parking. The developer has been working with us and has met a lot of our comments, and we're kind of getting towards the end with some limited comments remaining, but we are pushing still for some of those items that we think are important and would like to see, as Sean mentioned. We will be asking for a fence or something similar to provide some consistency with some of the other developments on Folly Field Road and provide a nice streetscape for Folly Field. There are one main concern that the town has, and if you have any further questions about it, we can bring Brian Eber up here, but there are 2 significant sized trees that the applicant is proposing to remove, but has not satisfied the town's concerns and demonstrated why they have to remove it. So the code requires that they explore all options, demonstrate that it's not feasible to keep the trees, and the town is not satisfied that they've addressed that yet. So that's another thing that we're pushing for. Like Sean mentioned, the property is zoned RD, resort development, allows 16 units per net acre. 134 units is allowed based on the acreage, and they're proposing 132. Maximum height in this district is 75 feet. I think the tallest building is about 66 feet proposed, so they're well under the maximum. I'll scroll down to the next plan sheet. This was the plan that Sean mentioned. We had asked for an elevation that shows what the proposed development would look like from Folly Field. So you can see this middle picture here is that illustration. Shows the 44-foot proposed height structure and then the 55-foot building off to the right, with proposed landscaping along the street edge. But like Sean mentioned, we'd like to see that enhanced with larger trees to kind of break up that scaling and mass of the structures, and also a fence.
Can we make it a little bigger? I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Can you see that a little better?
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
I believe that's all that I was going to go over. Like Sean mentioned, we're looking for input from you all. Like we said, staff is continuing to push for excellence and for the project to meet our town code and our plan. And we're looking for input from you all, and to allow that input, allow public comment, and allow the applicant to answer any questions as well.
Is the applicant here today?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Yes, go ahead, Sean.
Can I jump in just one second? And it is building on my previous comments. So, this gives a pretty good idea of the screening of while 66 feet is less than 75, it's still significant in this area. But you can see along the street edge, the concerns I have are that anybody could kind of pop through those bushes. The reason I'm thinking, well, I'm expecting a fence to be part of this is to help control some access as part of that. And if you look at the remainder of the Folly Field, the character of that street, I think some additional articulation would blend in much better with that overall context. I had the opportunity to walk the neighborhood in the rain yesterday with a couple of members of this community on a different issue. But when you're out there, if you really pay attention to kind of the neighborhood in that context and then project this in there, I think every effort we can make. So this becomes a additional value add to the community and doesn't become kind of the thing that folks point to. We missed an opportunity. So that's why I'm requesting that we have your consideration on these elements.
Thank you. If the applicant would like to speak, this would be a proper time for that? No one wants to speak? Okay. Or do you? Yes, Chester.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Chester Williams, I'm a local attorney. I represent the property owner here, and Brett Callahan is the leader of the development team.
Okay.
We're available to answer any questions that you have, but a couple of things that you need to understand. When a project like this starts through the development permit process, one of the first things it does is it goes before the design review board. And the design review board is charged with aesthetic issues, site plan, landscaping, what does it look like? This is the streetscape that was approved by the design review board. The site plans that are here were all approved by the design review board. And now, unfortunately, the developer finds himself in the position of the town staff saying, well, we're not sure we liked what the design review board approved, so we want you to change things. And that puts the developer in a difficult position. You know, accommodating, but it was the design review board who said no fence along the road. And now the town staff wants us to do something that would violate the design review board approval. And we're working through these issues with them, but it puts the developer here in a difficult position. With respect to the two significant trees that Nicole mentioned, the plans do provide for saving one of them. The other one, I don't know what sort of justification you have to remove it other than the arborist report says, take it out. Now, if the town staff has some other reason that they want to keep it, then they let us know about it. But that sort of thing, you know, justifying removing it, that is a completely subjective determination on the part of the town staff and something that we can't figure out what's going on with it. I mean, we're certainly willing to do reasonable changes, but reworking the entire stormwater drainage system, that is a multi-$100,000 task to do that at this point. What's there meets the town requirements. And at this point in the game, it's frankly, it's unreasonable to be asking the developer to change all that. So if y'all have any questions about anything that you've seen here, please, we'll be more than glad to address them. But otherwise, we'll be glad to listen to y'all's comments.
Thank you, sir. All right. Are there any public comments on this particular proposal? Gentleman over here. And by the way, we did receive copious comments from the Folly Field community by our portal, and I have spent an hour reading them. I just want you to know that. Okay. Yes, sir. Identify yourself, if you would.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Kieran Storn. I'm a full-time resident of Folly Field on the Hilton Head Island. Like Nicole said, Sean did steal our thunder, so you'll have to excuse some of what I have here. In 2015, this property was rezoned from recreational to resort development, despite protests from every surrounding neighborhood. It went from zero density to the highest density. According to the state of South Carolina, a zoning ordinance ensures that the development fits in with existing and future needs of the community. It also states that it prevents land overcrowding, avoid undue concentration of population, and lessens street congestion. This proposed development does none of the above and would only detract from the island. It is so not aligned with Fraser's vision for this island. Can I approach and give you some photographs?
If you would hand them to staff, we would appreciate it.
In their application, they claim to be in keeping with the neighborhood. The adjacent property along Follyfield Road is a 3-story building in Fiddler's Cove. It's not a 5-story building. These buildings are described as 3 and 4 stories. What they fail to mention is that it's over a parking lot. So there's under-building parking, and when you actually look at the building and you count it, it's 5 stories in, or at least most people would agree that it's 5 stories. The other resorts, Fiddler's Cove, Island Club, Beach and Tennis, etc., kept the mature trees to shield from public view and dampen their appearance. This development wants to rip out the mature trees, including an osprey nest on Follyfield Road, to make room for bigger buildings. Their arborist report from 2017 would have you believe that every tree was already dead or dying. Applying their logic, you could state that we're all dying. The other resorts, Fiddler's Cove, Island Club, Beach and Tennis, etc., have fenced perimeters. In addition to providing security, this decongests pedestrian traffic. This development does not have a fence, despite it's been suggested by the DRB. So that's contrary to what your previous person said. So if you go back and you look at the notes from the DRB, they were looking for a fence. And then at the next meeting, the developer came back and they said that they would increase the plantings along Follyfield Road. This creates a safety issue as people can pop out of the landscaping into the town's public pathway and into the path of oncoming cyclists, or worse yet, even e-cyclists. I would like to point out that there is a little buffer between that heavily used pedestrian cycle path and the speeding traffic along Follyfield Road. I mean, in some areas, you're just looking at a couple of feet. Fiddler's Cove has one entrance, as does Island Club, as does Beach and Tennis. Sea Cloister's the same. This development wants 2. How will this impact pedestrians and cyclists as they attempt to enjoy their afternoon stroll or cycle? There is only one path along Follyfield Road, so they don't have an alternative path. So basically, your cyclists have to use this path. They want 2 exits, and then with no fence, you're going to have people popping out from the landscaping. For the past 2 years, congestion and overcrowding at Islanders Beach Park and our beaches generally have been a hot topic. The proposed development is going to add hundreds of additional people onto an already overcrowded beach. Last but not least, I have never seen a traffic or environmental study related to this proposed development. People wait for 2 and often 3 cycles of the light at 278 and Follyfield Road. The original application used traffic counts from 2014. This is a very different neighborhood, and indeed a very different island from what it was in 2014. In summary, this is the wrong thing in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is really a square peg into a round hole. I would respectfully request that the town conduct an independent traffic study in July of 2023, when we actually have real traffic. An independent arborist report and an independent environmental study. Thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other comments from the public? Yes, ma'am.
Hello. My name is Edwina Dunlap, and I represent a large citizens group who started working with the town council a little over a year ago about the issues at Islanders Beach Park. We've worked really well with the town council, and we've made quite a few improvements. Islanders Beach Park was originally meant for residents of the island to have beach access and parking at the Islanders Beach Park. However, right beside this timeshare unit that's being proposed are, I think, 8 additional ones in Port Royal Village. So this is adding a tremendous amount of people that expect to use Islanders Beach Park as access to the beach. We're already having a serious problem. I mean, you have 8 other timeshare complexes in Port Royal Village. You have the Westin, you have the Barony, which is another timeshare village. You have Islands Links, which is up near the front of Palmetto Dunes, and they're all, or Port Royal, excuse me, and they're all using Islanders Beach Park as access to the beach. When we saw the plan for this about a year ago, They had put on their plan, the developer had put on their plan, this was their access to Islanders Beach Park. So they plan on another 800 to 1,000 people to access this small strip of beach that's already being used by so many people. If you go there during high season and high tide, it looks like the New Jersey shore on that beach. And now another 800 to 1,000. The town staff has agreed that the facilities are being so overused at Islanders Beach Park. And people from this group are crossing the street and walking down the road where residents are coming in to park to go to the beach. And here's another 800 to 1,000. And what lockouts mean is it means it doubles the unit to how many people they can rent to. Because instead of one unit, now it becomes 2 units that they can rent to 2 different groups of people. So that even increases the number of people. So we agree. We're residents. We don't live in the neighborhood. We drive to Islanders Beach Park because that's our only beach access for the people that live in the north end, Hilton Head Plantation and Indigo Run, and some people in Port Royal. This is our only beach access. And they want to bring another 800 to 1,000 people to one little strip of beach. We ask that you deny the whole project. Thank you.
It is not the power of the Planning Commission to, put a nix to any particular project like this. It is our job to kind of evaluate what the proposal is and get the feelings of the community so that we can get back to the developers and indicate what are the concerns of the community. And having read through all of the public portal comments, there's a long list of issues here, and not only to mention the obvious ones of the trees and the quality of life and the traffic that might be added to the lanes. The infrastructure issue, beach crowds, environment, overdevelopment, setbacks, roof lines, height, building heights, and so on and so forth. It is our job today to just get the feelings of the community, to give us some input so we can get back to the developer of the proposal and explain to them the things that are of concern to the community and see what, if anything, can be done to ameliorate those or to even, if necessary, make a change. But I have walked the property. I've been down there, I've looked at it and driven around it. And I have a couple of questions myself, but I'm going to let my fellow commissioners raise questions first. We'll start over here with Mr. Seabolt this time around. Anything? Nothing for you. Okay, Mr. Campbell.
Yeah, my question is this going to be a gated timeshare community? No? Okay.
Mr. D'Arienzo.
So this development is fronting Folly Field Road, and then access is to the Lions, I believe, on the other side. Is Lions basically fenced off from this proposed development?
That's a Windjammer Court behind it. And I don't believe there's a vehicular entrance or to that particular Windjammer. Is it Windjammer? No.
I think it's Wimbledon Court.
Wimbledon, that's what I'm thinking of, Wimbledon. There's no vehicular traffic going in and out of Windjammer, is there?
So the Lions, which is located to the north of the property,
Okay.
their access, there's a drive aisle that comes around the buildings this way and then back through this development.
Right.
And there's an access easement that runs through this subject property that they need to maintain for,
So that's for beach access to the...
no, vehicular access.
Oh, vehicular, for fire and that sort of thing, okay. Yes, Chester.
Thank you. Yes, the Lions is the multifamily development that's to the, if you're standing in Folly Field Road looking at this property, it's the one that's on the right-hand side.
Okay, got to the blue buildings, yeah.
The access to the Lions is off Wimbledon Court, across an easement that is on our property. And so that easement is being maintained, it's going to be redone for access to the lines. But that's separate and apart from the rest of the development.
Fair enough. And there's only one, all vehicular accesses off of Folly Field, is that correct? There are two?
Except for emergency vehicle access. There is an emergency vehicle access off Wimbledon Court. Everything else comes off Folly Field Road.
Fair enough, thank you. Any other, Mr. Hens, did you have some, or Rick, did you have more?
And it appears that this gentleman is correct that there is parking beneath the units themselves?
Yes.
And
Are those counted in the stories, that the 3- and 4-story buildings?
I'm not sure how Nicole counts her stories.
I'm going on with the plan show, and I'll pull those up. Yep.
Okay. In other words, if it's 4 residential stories plus a parking, that's 5 stories in the way I count.
The code refers to 4 stories over parking.
Pardon?
It's 4, the code refers to as 4 stories over parking.
4 and 1.
I didn't interrupt anybody when I was talking.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate the courtesy of saying so.
Thank you. Everybody be reminded. So we're talking about a parking level and then 4 residential
Which is typical
stories.
in multifamily developments.
I just want to make it clear, that's all. Thank you. And then some of the buildings are 3 and some are 4. Is that right? Yeah, right. Phase 1 is 3, and then phase 2 goes to 4 stories of residence?
I'd have to check. Building 6 and Building 7, off the top of my head, I don't know.
Which are the,
All right, but we're all within, but we're within the height limits. We are within the height limits from the LMO.
yes, we're well within that.
Thank you.
And so for comparison's sake, if you were to drive north on Folly Field Road to Gresslawn Avenue, there's a unit right there at the entrance of Port Royal Village, I believe it is. Is that the kind of building the basic concept of a building you're talking about?
You refer to the Barony?
Village House, yes.
I can't say that I'm familiar right off of Village House.
Thank you. Other questions, Mr. Hens? Do you have any comments?
Yeah. First of all, this has nothing to do with the developers here, but I know a concern of Islanders is that we're getting really crowded, and we can't find the workforce to support what we have now, and we're getting more and more crowded. It's almost like, okay, town, get the workforce housing so that we can accommodate this volume. But maybe that's an editorial. I think the cat was out of the bag when we went zoning from 0 density to the maximum density in just one fell swoop. How do you do that? How does that happen? I'm not sure. But it seems like that's when, if we want to control growth, that's when you do it. I don't think we can talk about that now. It sounds like this is after the fact for this development. But I am concerned that all the comments that we read were, hey, we're neighbors, and this is the neighborhood we bought into, and now, you know, this huge development is going to be in our neighborhood. I think it's really important for the town to listen to neighbors. I mean, this is who you represent, certainly the business interests, but the neighbors as well. And one of the comments I remember reading is that, you know, the gated communities, we control this. So we control the growth and density and mass. Why can't we get it right for those people that don't live in a gated community? And it seems like certainly what we heard from all the comments are from residents that don't feel that protection. And that concerns me, and I think it ought to concern, if not for this development, for future developments.
Thank you, sir. As it is not in our purview to, you know, forward this along or to nix it, I will say a couple things that I hope will be taken up. The suggestion of the street situation there, street side situation on Follyfield, I realize that the Design Review Board did not talk about a fence. I would encourage the developers of this particular proposal to try to work something out with them with regard to the buffers and the buffers, as well as there's a trespassing issue that has been raised, and that is that folks from this potential project would be walking across other private property to get to the beach, even though there is access just down the road to the Islander Beach. That fence might solve some community problems in terms of access and maybe walking through other people's property to get to the beach from such a project. In terms of the roof lines and setbacks are within the LMO. Building height is also. I would also encourage the developers to maybe read the same public comments that we've got that have come through the porthole, and see what could be offered to the community in terms of crosswalks and things of that nature that would help the community adjust to such a project. I mean, it's private property, and there are limitations to what government can do to private property. But at the same time, we want to make sure it fits within the community, and that your neighbors in the community are going to be more comfortable with the project if certain issues are addressed. Let's see here. There's safety, security issues, and fencing might help in that regard as well, and also perhaps landscaping buffers that could serve as fence as well as a physical fence. In terms of a traffic study, I wanted to ask Chester, has there been a traffic study on this particular thing, or environmental impact study of any kind?
As far as traffic study goes,
yes, sir.
In connection with the rezoning of the property back in 2015, yes, there was a traffic study done in order to prove that we didn't have to do a traffic study. So the increase in density isn't sufficient enough to require a traffic impact analysis.
Wouldn't trigger one.
Redevelopment of the property. Okay. But we did it anyway just to prove that we didn't have to do it. So.
Fair enough, sir. Thank you. All right. The purpose of our visit, yes, ma'am, I'll get to you in just a second. The purpose of our thing here today is to allow us to hear from the community, and also to make the developers aware of what is going on in the community, what's being said, and what maybe might need to be addressed with the community, and even going back with the Design and Review Board. Ma'am, you have a comment. Please identify yourself.
Yes, thank you. I'm Kelly Wiggins. I live at 30 Wimbledon Court, so behind the subdivision there.
I'm sorry I messed up that name.
Oh, no, it's a problem. And so my concern is a lot of this seems to be focusing on how Folly Field is going to be impacted visually and stuff. I'm more concerned of what's going to happen on Wimbledon Court. It's a very narrow pathway to pass through. Are we going to be looking at a construction site, and for like, when is this starting, when is this ending? What is our buffer that we're going to get on Wimbledon Court?
Okay, well, that will be addressed, I assure you, if it hasn't already. All right, any other comments from the commissioners? If not, we appreciate the comments that have been made both here today and also with regard to the comments that were sent in through the portal. And we will work with the town staff. And Missy, do you have something you want to add? And Nicole?
Sure, yeah. I just wanted to add that we did look up the DRB approval, and one of the conditions that was identified was to study adding a fence along Follyfield Road with the suggestion of a pierced brick was in their notice of approval. So the DRB did discuss a fence and suggested it. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicole, did you have anything you wanted to add on this?
No, I was going to
Okay.
mention the same.
All right, with that in mind, we will take that under advisement and hope that the developers will as well. Next on our agenda, let me see if I can find my agenda here. We're going to go back to the LMO amendments, section B, and Nicole, are you going to take us through these?
I'm sorry?
Are you going to take us through these LMOs?
Yes, sir.
Section B? Thank you all for coming.
So I'll be presenting the proposed LMO amendments, which is considered Tier 1, or known as Tier 1. At the November 1st, 2022 meeting, the LMO committee recommended approval of the proposed amendments. At that meeting, the committee again voiced concerns about the proposed revisions to the dwelling unit definition. They questioned why there is a need to change the current definition and had concerns that the proposed revisions might create complications with other provisions in the LMO. After additional staff review, it was decided that the current definition is sufficient and a determination about what constitutes a separate dwelling unit is what needs to be updated. And so that proposed amendment was pulled from this set. Staff's recommendation is that the Planning Commission forward the proposed amendments to Town Council with a recommendation of approval.
Anything else on these LMO, the B section? Anything that ends your discussion?
Oh, no, I was going to go through each one unless you
Okay,
don't
that's
need me
fine.
to.
Okay, fair enough. I thought you were finished.
You want me to
for a
rush along, don't you?
moment. No, that's all right. Take your time.
Okay. So the first amendment that's in your packet is the proposed removal of staff-granted waivers. This was proposed by staff and is to remove all provisions allowing staff-granted waivers. It was decided it was more appropriate for a waiver or variant from the code to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a request for a variance. So in your packet on pages 1 through 7, it shows all of the sections where the language is either proposed to be removed. I'm sorry? Do you? Oh, I apologize. What I'm referring to was the drafted language. This.
Well, if you could just tell us instead of referring to.
Sure, yeah.
It's in there.
Sure, I'll do that. So I won't go through each one of these sections that's being revised, as the majority of them are just strike-throughs with removing the waiver language. There are a few that I will explain because the language is being amended instead of just stricken through.
Fine.
So the first one deals with the properties functioning together waiver. It dealt with adjacent use setback and buffers, and it was amended so that there's no adjacent use setback or buffer requirement for non-single-family properties when the proposed development and the adjacent development function as a single development due to having either shared parking, connecting vehicular access or shared stormwater facilities, and the recording of a cross-access easement agreement between the two properties will be required. The second revision is the access to street separation requirements. This was amended to remove the option for the provision for it to be waived, but language was added to allow the access point to be optimally located if, by meeting the separation required, it would render the lot unusable. One thing I did want to note is that number 3, for those of you who do have the packet in front of you, number 3 under J on page 5, when I was reading through this the other day, I did notice that the added language is shown in the wrong spot. It should be inserted at the end of the 4th line before the dash instead of at the end of that paragraph. So that will be fixed going forward. I just wanted to bring that to y'all's attention. And then the third revision deals with the drainage design standards. These were amended to remove the option for the peak discharge requirement to be waived, but language was added that states that the peak discharge requirement doesn't need to be met if the applicant demonstrates that they have a suitable means of flow into a downstream tidal discharge point, accessible by means of a recorded permanent storm drainage easement through drainage infrastructure that will convey the peak discharge from the 100-year storm without any adverse impacts on downstream properties. So those were the three changes that deal with staff-granted waivers. The rest of the list that's up on your screen were just where staff struck through the language and removed that provision. Any questions on this before we move on to the next one?
Gentlemen, anything? Go ahead, please, Nicole.
Okay, the next amendment, for those that have the packet on page 8, is to allow variances from all sections of the LMO other than for use, density, and height, and not just the sections that are listed in the LMO currently. When this initial list was presented to the Public Planning Committee, use and density were listed as the only provisions you can not get a variance for. It was recommended by a member of the Public Planning Committee that height also be added to the list that you cannot get a variance from, and therefore it's been added for your consideration. Any questions on this one?
Well, yeah, let me ask a question. In talking about one of our previous applicants down there, Seapine Circle, 45 is the limit in that area, and they were asking for an architectural variance of up to 55, 10 extra feet for architectural features. So under this proposed amendment, we would never be allowed to allow such a variance?
No, if this gets passed as proposed by the Public Planning Committee and Town Council, no, you cannot get a variance from height.
From the future? Once,
in the future, if
once
it
Town
gets
Council
adopted,
acts,
yes.
Once Town Council, fair enough.
Staff's original recommendation, like I said, was just for use and density, but height was asked to be added into what you cannot get it.
Fair enough, thank you.
So that's interesting. So we could, if we follow this and based on the first
Proposal,
proposal, you would have to settle for a flat top roof, even though it looks uglier than anything, versus a nice, beautiful pitched roof. So it's just something worth considering.
Okay. Thank you. Let's-
Okay, the next amendment on page 8 of your packet as well is to allow outdoor screened bike storage in the LC and CC zoning districts, which are the only two districts that allow bike businesses but not outdoor storage of them. This amendment is a recommendation from the Board of Zoning Appeals as a result of variance requests pertaining to bike businesses over the past few years. Staff is also proposing more specificity related to the screening requirements and what constitutes outdoor storage as it relates to bicycle businesses.
All right, a question here, Nicole. Are we saying now that if the bicycle shop has outdoor storage overnight or whatever, that they now must fence that or screen it?
It needs to be screened in those districts, yes, sir.
Okay, and that's what this would do, right?
This allows for outdoor screened bike storage in those two zoning districts where it's currently not allowed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next one is also a recommendation from the Board of Zoning Appeals. And the request is to revise the use classification for manufacturing so that a brewery is listed as a manufacturing use, but so that small-scale breweries, such as a nano or microbrewery, are not considered manufacturing, but considered more of a commercial use similar to a bar or eating establishment.
Okay.
The next one on page 9 is a recommendation of the Planning Commission as a result of their review of the annual traffic report presented by staff. They asked that June traffic counts be replaced with July traffic counts for traffic impact analysis plan standards.
Fair enough.
This next amendment, which is recommended by staff and several developers.
We have a question.
Sure.
You were talking about the brewery, does that also count for distilleries too?
I think it would fall in line with that.
That's not where
We'll take a look at that. Yeah, the request was specific to brewery, but I think it functions the same as a distillery. We'll take a look at the definition.
Throw winery in there too, I like
Don't get the moonshiners upset with us now.
Yeah, I like moonshine.
Okay, so this is on pages 9 through 11 of your packet, and it amends the provisions for a temporary certificate of compliance to change when plantings are required on single-family lots in buffers as part of a subdivision certificate of compliance. Landscaping is currently required to be planted before a CFC is issued for a subdivision, which is prior to the homes being constructed. The landscaping is often damaged during construction of the homes. So this amendment will allow a performance guarantee or bond for a specific period of time where landscaping and tree planting is deferred due to inappropriate weather conditions for planting or the likelihood that the trees will be damaged during additional construction activity related to the subdivision.
Fair enough.
I'm sorry?
Family compound or anything like that?
It would apply to family subdivision, yes, sir. This next amendment is recommended by a business owner and is on page 11 and 12 of the packet, is to amend the definition of changeable copy as it relates to signs to allow signs to be changed manually or electronically. Currently, signs are not permitted to be changed electronically, and this would allow a business owner, in particular, a business owner of a gas station had asked, because of short staffing, if there's one person that's working at the facility and they need to go out and change their gas prices, they would have to lock the store, go out, manually change it. So this would allow them to change it electronically inside the store and help them function better. So the sign provisions are proposed to be amended as well to allow the signs to be changed electronically, and there'll be limitations on the frequency and timing. So it won't be something that's like a continual change in a moving sign to address any concerns with that. This next amendment is recommended by staff and is on page 12 through 15 of the packet, and is to amend how the calculation of height is measured to allow height to be measured from 11 or 13 feet above mean sea level, or pre-development grade, whichever is higher. So, for example, if pre-development grade is 12 feet for a non-residential development, you wouldn't want to measure height from 11 feet, you would want to measure from 12 feet since it's higher. So height's measured from 11 or 13 feet, depending on if it's residential or commercial, and this just added in the pre-development grade provision. There's also several sections in the LMO that still mention height being measured from the BFE, base flood elevation. These sections were unintentionally left out or overlooked when changes were made to the LMO last year when the new flood maps were adopted. So this is just being cleaned up with this amendment.
Fair enough.
This next amendment is on page 15 of your packet and is recommended by staff. The application requirements for minor subdivisions states that it requires all the same requirements for a major subdivision, with the exception of owner's consent, open space dedication, and phasing plan. And this amendment will remove the exemption for owner's consent, as that should be required for all application types. So this is just kind of another cleanup amendment. And this last one is
Number 10.
another amendment recommended by staff and is on page 15 and 16 of the packet, which will amend provisions in the subdivision standards for applicants wishing to make changes to a previously platted subdivision. Currently, lots in a platted subdivision can be combined in a way that results in an increase in density or additional lots. The proposed language requires that deviations to a previously platted subdivision, residential subdivision, will require a public hearing and approval by the Planning Commission. We've also added criteria that the Planning Commission can use when reviewing these requests. And this amendment does include provisions for public notice requirements in Chapter 2 as well.
Fair enough.
And that's all I have. Again, staff's recommending that the Planning Commission forward these amendments to Town Council with a recommendation of approval.
Thank you. There were
I do
two-
want to mention also that the Public Planning Committee is the next step, which will be on January 26th of 2023.
Okay. Thank you, Nicole. There were two things I wanted to bring to my fellow commissioners' attention, if I can go back and find my scribbles here. Okay. One thing in particular, and that is with regard to the variances on height for buildings. I would move that we approve these LMO amendments and ask that they be forwarded to Town Council for consideration. But I would also ask town council to carefully consider the building height variances for architectural reasons and maybe come up with some particular standard or ratio wherein we could make our buildings, architecturally stylish and not square blocks all the time because of the building height limits, that the town council might want to consider some flexibility in that variances amendment to the LMO. But other than that, I would move that these be, with that proviso, that they carefully consider the variances on height, that I would move that this be moved on to town council for their consideration. Is there a second? Thank you, Ms. Darians. Are there other comments or questions before we vote?
It's a public hearing, so.
Oh, okay, yes. Are we, anybody out in the, I keep having to be reminded, anybody in the audience here today want to make a comment on these LML amendments? Yes, sir. Please identify yourself.
Daniel Anthony. I had one on the clarification on the signs. It's not going to be something that they can say. What I'm alluding to is that if they're allowed to change it electronically, is there going to be some kind of provision that keeps it from being like a neon sign?
Yes, there's timing and frequency provisions added into the language, and the lighting and neon signs is not allowed in our code.
Okay. And the other one I wanted to address was the height issue. I like some of the stuff that was said about, the architecture, maybe having these buildings, have some architecture so they're not flat roofs, but can there be some kind of wording and a provision that it is only for architecture? Because I can see where if we allow them to do this extra feet, I can see somebody coming in with
Taller
a loophole
buildings, yeah.
of doing some kind of some kind of living space.
Penthouses on top. Yes.
Exactly.
I appreciate that. That was the gist of my comments as well, that the town council might want to consider some sort of a stricter rule and that makes sense so that we don't have a bunch of square buildings on the island from this point forward. All right, with that, is there a vote? All in favor of moving this on to town council with my one caution? Thank you. We have a unanimous vote on that issue. All right, thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
Let's see, where are we now? We're through the, okay, now we're at STDV 002-403-2022, Octavio Roman Gonzalez, owner of the parcel, proposes to name a new driveway located at 24th, or I don't want to say Orange, it's Orange Lane, and there are no other affected parcels. Yes, please, Johanna.
Good afternoon. Johanna Pfister, Deputy Fire Chief. This was one we brought before you previously, and we were asked to reconsider the name.
Right.
We went back to the applicant and we asked if we could use a variation of Orage, so we are moving forward with Orage Trace. So they are just a small driveway off of Orage Lane. Yes.
Is this going to be a street sign, like a double street sign there? Okay, that's all.
Yep.
Any other comments from the commissioners? Okay, without objection, I think we can take a vote on this one. Yasmin, would you call the roll on this?
Mr. D'Arienzo?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebel?
Yes.
Mr. Hens?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Scanlon?
Yes. Thank you. Okay, the next item on our agenda is STDV 002585-2022. Hank Hofford with Bennett Hofford Construction Company proposes to name a new street that will be located off Jonesville Road on Beaufort County tax map. Jahida, you're going to be also covering this one?
Yes, I will be presenting this one as well. So this one, we are proposing to two street names, got cut off, but Sandy Oaks Drive and Sandy Oaks Lane. They are still in the process of getting approval, so we moved forward with 2 names in case something changes, that we have the second street name should we need it. It is a T, it's a T road, so I'm going to show you that in a moment, but we may, depending on how the subdivision ends up, we may only use Sandy Oaks Drive, but we may need it, Sandy Oaks Lane as well, in case there is some deviation. So the property is off of Jonesville Road. That is a picture of the parcel. You can see it is next to Walking Horse and across from the paddocks. This is what the proposed subdivision looks like, and like I said, we are proposing to use Sandy Oaks Drive and Sandy Oaks Lane. Sandy Oaks Drive would be the main road, and Lane would be the cross street. We have vetted the street names, and they're not duplicated, phonetically similar, or confused with any other streets within Hilton Head or the county.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the commissioners?
Okay, just a pet peeve of mine. It has nothing to do with this. How come you name a street, Sandy Oaks Drive, Sandy Oaks Lane, Sandy Oaks Court? Because when somebody tells you where they live, I live on Sandy Oaks. Why not just make it a different name altogether instead of a court here and a lane there and a road there? It's just curious.
So typically, if that is what, there are kind of 2 different philosophies. There are people who want the names to be totally different. There are people who want them to be derivatives of the same thing. Going forward, we are making sure that if they are the same Sandy Oaks Drive and Sandy Oaks Lane, that the numbering is totally different, because we do have some subdivisions where previously in addressing they gave the same numbers, so it is somewhat confusing. But so we would there would not be a 2 Sandy Oaks Lane and a 2 Sandy Oaks Drive. The numbering, we would start them differently. So in areas where the streets are together, some of the developers want the names to be the same, and we wouldn't do it like we wouldn't have a Sandy Oaks Lane here and a Sandy Oaks Drive across the island, because then it would be confusing. But because they are a part of the same subdivision, we allow them to use a derivative.
And that helps from fire and rescue, especially, I would think.
It does, because we know that they're all still in the same area. Like I said, we wouldn't let Sandy Oaks Drive be one place and Sandy Oaks Lane be on the south end.
Fair enough. Are there any comments or questions with regard to this particular item, Mr. Commissioners? If not, may I have a motion and second to adopt this one?
Mr. Chairman, could you please offer public comment? It's a public hearing.
Are there any public, excuse me, are there any public members here who want to comment on this particular item? Seeing none, we'll move to a motion and a vote. Is there a motion to adopt this one? I have Mr. Campbell, second Mr. Seabold. All in favor? All 5, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Shahida. We're now going to talk about some commission business. In that we have several vacancies on the Planning Commission at this point, and I've had a chance to talk with the mayor and the town manager. What we're going to do is we're going to have to make some changes here. Obviously, we have to replace our mayor as who was vice chairman here on this commission. And so I'm going to nominate Mr. Mark O'Neill, and I know Mark is out there in video land watching us today, but I would like to nominate Mark O'Neill for the job of vice chairman.
Second that.
We have a second over here. Is there any other nominations from the commission? If not, all in favor of electing Mr. O'Neill as our new vice chairman, it's a unanimous vote, 5-0. And now also, as I mentioned to members of the commission earlier today, we have vacancies on some of our planning. This is my chairman's report for today. We have some vacancies, obviously, due to elections, and Mr. Alfred has moved on to town council, Mr. Alfred being with us here today, and obviously the mayor has been elevated. And so we have several vacancies, so I'd like to make some appointments, at least interim, on the committees so that we can operate effectively until such time as we get a full complement of members of this commission, and the mayor has to nominate or select those individuals. And it may take us as many as a couple of weeks to months in order to get all of our complement on here. So I've asked Mr. O'Neill to also serve as chair of the CIP committee as of today, and Mr. Commissioner D'Arienzo to serve as chair of the LMO committee as of today, and Mr. Campbell to serve as vice chair of the LMO committee as of today, and Mr. Hens to please chair the Rules of Procedures Committee as of today. And Tom, I noted that I am an ex officio member of that particular committee, and in order to have a full complement, you have to invite me to serve on that committee as a voting member.
So invited.
Well, you have to do it in writing, unfortunately, and copy members of the staff, so you can invite me to be a voting member of your committee, and I would be glad to serve as your vice chair for Rules and Procedure. As I say, these are due to the vacancies that we have, and we have to make all these appointments. And I take it you have all agreed to these commitments, and Mr. O'Neill did send me a note earlier today. So thank you all for stepping up during this interim period until we receive a full complement of our commissioners. All right, are there any committee reports? Anybody want, LMO, anything you want to say, Rick, on the LMO committee?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay, any other committees want to make a report at this time? If not, staff reports, we've already covered the issue.
Missy's coming forward.
Missy, do you have something you want to add on staff reports?
Yes, real quick. I know that last fall we went through a rules of procedure amendment to go down to just one meeting a month.
Right.
Obviously now the work volume for the Planning Commission has increased, and we're reviewing all of the subdivisions and major DPRs for information purposes. We're working on an LMO amendment set that will come through where it will be review and approval by the Planning Commission. That should come through sometime late spring, early summer. And we'd like to look at a possible amendment to the rules through the Rules of Procedure Committee to look at going back to 2 meetings per month. So I just wanted to put that on your radar, that we'll likely be looking at making that request to the Planning Commission coming forward.
Okay. And Tom, I know you have some timing issues, so as you look at going to 2 meetings per month, keep in mind not only the dates, but also the times that we would start these meetings. And if 2 o'clock is the most convenient time for all 2 meetings a month, then we'd have to go with that. But I wanted to make sure that we have our quorums at these various meetings. And if there's, are there any other issues to come before us today? If not, I believe it's time for me to call for adjournment, and this meeting is now concluded. Thank you.